Welcome to Cross Life, Prophecy in the News. Where we look at current world events through the lens of Bible prophecy. As the world's struggling to navigate through tumultuous times, we explore prophetic Bible passages relative to today's context. This is about our future and preparing today for the great tribulation that's just ahead. I came across a few articles that got me thinking about worldview. Researcher finds catastrophic decline in Christian worldview. A biblical worldview has a radical effect on a person's life. Worldview may have more impact on mental health than chemical imbalances. So, the words of wisdom for today, and it's from that wise old sage, Rick Brinegar, has given us permission to quote him on this. An unbiblical worldview is catastrophic. As we look at these few verses here, be thinking about how the verse applies to your particular worldview. If somebody were to ask you, what is your worldview? Or how do you look at the universe? Or what's your philosophy of life? Do you know what you would say?
I have a biblical worldview.
Here's a verse that is likely to describe or set up the context for having a worldview. It's in Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect.
Amen.
And you were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Ephesians 2, 1 and 2. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. Colossians 2:8. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may know the things freely given us by God. 1 Corinthians 2:12. A worldview is the framework from which we view reality and make sense of life and the world. It's any theology, philosophy, a movement, a religion that provides an overarching approach to understanding God, the world, and man's relation to God and the world. For example, how would you describe a 2-year-old's worldview?
Hopeful. Joyful.
Self-centered.
A 2-year-old believes he's the center of his world. A secular humanist believes that the material world is all that exists, and a Buddhist believes he can be liberated from suffering by self-purification. On the other hand, someone with a biblical worldview or a Christian worldview believes his primary reason for existence is to love and serve God.
Amen.
This brings us to why we're here. Part of why we're here is covered in Acts 14, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith, that we must, through much tribulation, enter into the kingdom of God. The great tribulation is just ahead. Anybody feel like they're in much tribulation right now?
No. Praise God.
What's the most tribulation you've ever experienced? Anybody?
I've been arrested
Mm-hmm.
In 3 different African countries
Mine would be
on mission trips.
coming to the end of myself before I got saved.
Mm-hmm. Anybody had major surgery or gotten into a fight with somebody or had some sort of disaster?
I had a skydive.
When you broke your ankle, yes. Well, that's nothing. Terrible times are just ahead. And when Peter went out to explain to the crowd what was all the commotion, what was all the noise they're hearing, and why they were hearing their own certain dialects being spoken, hearing about glorious works of God, he explained to the crowd, but this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. So what he was doing was explaining the times in light of Bible prophecy. He knew the passage from Joel, and he knew that was what was happening all around them. And your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens I will pour out in those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy.
When the apostles start speaking in tongues, everyone wonders what's going on. And to explain what's happening, Peter cites this prophecy out of Joel chapter 2, verse 28 through 32. Joel there prophesies that the Lord is going to send his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, on his followers, that there's going to be signs and wonders that are performed, and that salvation is going to be offered to everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord. So Peter says, this is what's happening. It's a fulfillment of this long-awaited prophecy. The Holy Spirit has come down and given power to God's followers. It's visible and it's undeniable. Signs and wonders have been observed, namely through Jesus, and those signs and wonders have attested to the fact that he is from God. He has God's approval. And then in fulfillment of that statement about salvation being offered to everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord, this is the first time now, after Jesus' death on the cross, the sacrifice has been made, first time that salvation is being offered to people, anyone who comes to God and asks for that grace. And remember that Joel was a prophet in the Old Testament. The Old Testament scriptures were the source of authority for the Jews. And so as they hear this, and as they hear Peter explaining how this passage that they're probably all familiar with is coming to fruition right before their eyes, they probably start to perk up and say, oh, maybe we should listen to this guy some more.
The he in Daniel 9:27 is the Antichrist. The second question is, what is the covenant? Well, Genesis 15:18 explains, it says, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. So all the way back in the first book of the Bible, God made a covenant with Abraham that the Holy Land would be given to his descendants for a homeland. This is referred to as the Abrahamic covenant. Number 3, what is the confirmation of the covenant? Well, if the covenant is God's promise to Abraham and his descendants who would live in the promised land, then what's the confirmation of the covenant? Well, we've already proven above that the Antichrist is the he of Daniel 9:27. So it follows that he is the one who will confirm the covenant. In other words, the Antichrist will confirm Israel's right to a homeland in the promised land.
What they're not telling you about Iran. The Billy Graham of Iran, not Billy Graham himself, but the one they call the Billy Graham of Iran, says Israel defeating Iran-backed terror groups is prophesied in the Bible. Dr. Hamroz Shariat, Israel's ongoing conflict with Iranian proxies aligns with biblical prophecies. A prophesied peace between Israel and the Arab nations is on the horizon. Iranians are increasingly discontent with their government.
Is there a growing divide between the regime and the people?
Definitely, yes. And it's not recent. It has taken over 40 years for the people of Iran to wake up to what Islam is. And they have experienced Islam and Islamic rule for firsthand for over 40 years. And they've come to conclusion the problem is not just the government. The problem is Islam itself. That's why we see a high number of Iranian Muslims come and to Christ, because they have not just rejected the government, they've rejected Islam. So there is such a gap. Let me share this with you. Such a gap between the government and people. So when the government puts on these rallies saying death to Israel, death to America, the people of Iran say, we love Israel, we love America. And that's the trend. That's the growing number of Iranians who love America and love Israel, because there's such a disconnect with the government.
We're not hearing that in the media. The legacy media is not reporting that.
Oh, not at all. Not many people know after October attack of Hamas, we know that the media covered it on about the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas demonstrations, protests in America. You saw it everywhere. You saw it on campuses. You saw it on the street. You saw it on Washington, D.C. What you did not see, Tony, is all the Iranians who came on streets, even in America, in Los Angeles, in Washington, D.C., in San Diego, everywhere, Iranians came out pro-Israel. Not even one Iranian rally was pro-Palestine. And the media did not cover that. Iranians are pro-Israel.
Next along our final 7-year timeline, World War III. What are the 4 countries that house the Euphrates River again? Somebody want to read this verse out loud?
And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, for it slay the third part of men. Revelations 9:13-15.
The Euphrates starts there in Turkey, comes down through Syria, and down through Iraq, and finally forms the border between Iraq and Iran. War with Iran is imminent. Concerns about all-out war. Israel to respond imminently to Iran's attack. Israeli officials say a response to Iran's attack earlier this month is imminent. Iran fired nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel on October the 1st. Many Iranians say they're concerned the potential Israeli retaliation could lead to an all-out war.
In the Iranian capital, Tehran, people go about their daily routine despite the growing threat of an Israeli attack.
Our life is not practically affected by Israel's threat of attacking us, but mentally we feel threatened because we've seen how the war can be devastating during the Iran-Iraq war.
The business here continues as usual, but the messages written on the walls tell of extraordinary times. The posters of the fallen Iranian allies and officials are everywhere. On this one, it says the beginning of the end of Zionism in both Persian and Hebrew, showing Iranian drones headed towards Israel. Another one has God's victory is close written on it, a reminder of a potential war. Hashim Khosravi is a bookseller in Tehran. He says a war will only cost more lives.
What matters to me is human life and peace. I cannot understand what all this killing is about. It must stop.
The tension between Iran and Israel turned into direct conflict when Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus last April. Iran responded by launching hundreds of drones and missiles at Israeli territory. That was the first time Iran attacked Israel from its soil. Iran's second attack came early this month in response to Israel's assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and the killing of Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. Mina Aryanfer believes her country's involvement in the escalation is justified.
Defending the innocent and oppressed people of Gaza and Lebanon is a humanitarian obligation, and this is what Iran is doing.
Some Iranians firmly believe Israel will attack Iran soon.
I believe Israel will attack, and Iran will respond harder than ever. In case of a war, Israel stands no chance.
The U.S. had already sent ship and their planes and everything over there already. U.S. is involved too.
Israel takes out key leader in war with Hezbollah. Israel continues to plan to strike Iran. Israel confirms it eliminated the upcoming leader of Hezbollah, Hashem Safiaddin. And Israel still taking out Hezbollah targets in Lebanon.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in the Middle East for the 11th time since the war began, trying to revive ceasefire talks to free the hostages and end the Gaza war. He may have come at an opportune time. Since IDF soldiers killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar last week, talk of deals is active again.
The death of Sinwar does create an important opportunity to bring the hostages home, to bring the war to an end, and to ensure Israel's security.
The head of the Mossad, Israel's largest intelligence agency, is talking up a comprehensive deal that would end the fighting with Hamas in Gaza, as well as the war with Hezbollah, and free all the hostages. Israel is also considering a smaller deal Egypt is proposing that would free several hostages now in exchange for a 2-week ceasefire in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel is planning its retaliatory strike on Iran after the Islamic Nation attacked with 180 ballistic missiles. Hezbollah's recent strike on Benjamin Netanyahu's home is adding to the urgency.
Their attacks with drones, missiles, rockets, their attack on the private home of the Prime Minister, it's all part of a major campaign, which at the end of it all is led and commanded in Tehran.
Israel is now confirming that it eliminated Hashem Safiaddin, the Hezbollah official expected to lead the terror group after Hassan Nasrallah's death. The IDF is still taking out Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, which are placed deep within the civilian population. Stunning images show an Israeli missile falling down the side of a building in Beirut before it explodes, bringing the entire structure down. Across Israel, as people are winding up the biblical fall holidays this week, Many are remembering the horror of the Hamas attacks just over a year ago and the hostages still in Gaza.
Israel scares Iran with new laser weapon. Israel has introduced a revolutionary $1 billion laser weapon system designed to counter the threat of Iranian hypersonic missiles. As regional tensions escalate, Israel's new laser weapon represents a pivotal advancement in military defense.
The development of advanced weapon systems in Israel has been a key focus of the country's defense strategy for years. Faced with ongoing threats from various groups and regional powers, Israel has been investing heavily in cutting-edge technologies to bolster its defense capabilities. One of the most recent and revolutionary additions to Israel's defense arsenal is the Iron Beam, a laser weapon system that offers a potentially game-changing solution to countering missile, drone, and rocket attacks. This system, sometimes referred to as the Shield of Light, represents a significant leap forward in air defense technology, and its introduction is timely, given the increasing frequency and sophistication of attacks against Israel. Throughout much of the 21st century, Israel has faced a continuous barrage of rocket attacks, particularly from the Gaza Strip. These attacks, combined with missile threats from neighboring countries like Iran, Hezbollah, and Lebanon, and various other groups, have forced Israel to prioritize the development of robust air defense systems. Israel's Iron Dome, which is perhaps the most well-known missile defense system in the world, has proven highly effective at intercepting short-range rockets and mortars. However, despite its success, the Iron Dome has its limitations, particularly when it comes to cost and the ability to intercept large-scale, simultaneous attacks. On April 13, 2024, Israel was faced with one of its most challenging missile barrages in recent memory. Iran launched more than 300 drones and missiles at Israel, with Hezbollah adding dozens of rockets targeting Israeli Defense Force, IDF positions in the Golan Heights. This attack was part of a larger coordinated effort, with Iranian-backed forces in Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen also contributing to the assault. While Israel's multi-layered air defense system, which includes the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow missile defense systems, successfully intercepted the majority of these missiles, a few still managed to hit their targets, highlighting the need for further advancements in missile defense.
Turkey wants anti-Israel alliance of Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. Three of those countries are mentioned in the Euphrates River War verse. What are those three countries?
Iran, Turkey, Syria.
Israel, the most concrete threat to regional and global peace, says Erdogan. Russia, Iran, and Syria should do more to protect Syria's territorial integrity, he says.
There are those who criticize you, Turkey, for providing a home for Hamas, who the US say are terrorists, and you say that you are opposed to terrorism.
We are, of course, against terrorism and terrorists, but I'm one of the leaders who is real familiar with Hamas, and I never called Hamas a terrorist organization. And I don't approach Hamas as a terrorist organization now, because Hamas is spending efforts in order to protect their motherland, and they are actually a group of resistance. So I can't call such a group of resistance a terrorist organization. Let's look back in time, all the way down to 1947, and up until now, Hamas, or Palestine, let's say, have been losing a lot of territory, and this is where we stand today.
There will be many watching in the US who will be
October 7th incidents and what happened there. We can see the reasons that prepared the conditions for October the 7th to occur. I would like to ask you how many Palestinians were killed. And let's look at the backdrop of all the incidents that have occurred, and then you will see a much different picture.
How Trojan horse pager bomb fooled Hezbollah. We talked about the pager bombs last time we met. We didn't have an actual diagram of the inner workings. We assumed it had a detonator in there somehow, and somehow it escaped scanning. They didn't know it was a bomb. The agents who built the pagers designed the battery. Actually, Israel built the pagers. They designed a battery that concealed a small but potent charge of plastic explosive and a novel detonator that was invisible to X-ray. Usually a detonator is a metallic cylinder of some kind. They didn't have that kind of detonator. Here's the diagram. It shows, in the battery pack, it shows 2 lithium-ion cells sandwiching a sheet of plastic explosive and a strip of highly flammable material, the detonator. So the kind of explosive they use is called PETN. And the detonation material there on the left, the bottom part of the sandwich, is right next to that thin layer of explosives. And then the other battery cell is on top of it and fits into this battery pack casing on the right.
How big is it?
Like a matchbox. About the size of a matchbox, they said.
Wow.
Next on our final 7-year timeline, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes.
Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places of many
Left to rot after COVID-19 jab. On December 15th, 2021, Larry Lowe's life changed. He was 54, rarely ill, fit, healthy, and running 10 kilometers most days, until he got a Pfizer C booster. Within days, he developed numbness on the right side of his face and started experiencing pain, and it's gotten worse since then. Mark of the Beast. Would like to read that for us.
Revelations 13, 16, and 17. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand, in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, with the name of the beast, or the number of his name.
Norway makes cash payments easier. In a major U-turn in the global war on cash, the government and the Central Bank of Norway, one of Europe's most cashless economies, are seeking to slow or even reverse the mass abandonment of cash.
But first, something we often talk about on the Late Debate, and that's the dangers of a cashless society, though it doesn't seem many Australian politicians are concerned. Others, however, are starting to take note. The Norwegian government is passing legislation to guarantee the rights of consumers to use cash when buying goods and services. Now, what's interesting about that is that Norway has one of the highest uptakes of digital use. A recent survey found that only 3% of Norwegians had used cash in their last purchase at a physical store. The Norwegian government, though, sees risks that they want to mitigate. They want to protect consumers who don't want to use digital by guaranteeing them the right to still use cash. And they want to protect the economy in the event of, say, an internet collapse, so that people can still buy and sell with cash in plentiful supply. This follows the Swedish government's decision to compel banks to offer cash withdrawals. Now, here in Australia, just recently, we've talked about the fact, Caleb, in Western Australia, Bank West closed not only 60 branches, but all the ATMs associated with them, saying we are going fully digital. And of course, we remember well Bob Katter at the Australian Parliament Cafe getting all upset because even in the Parliament Cafe, they wouldn't take his cash.
John Kerry says the First Amendment is blocking our curbing of disinformation. Climate envoy John Kerry took heat recently for his comments about the First Amendment at the World Economic Forum. During a panel on green energy, an audience member asked the former Secretary of State what can be done to combat so-called climate disinformation.
Most Americans don't have much faith in our political institutions these days. Most think the country's going in the wrong direction. Both parties seem controlled by extremists. Positive things can't get done. Compromise is a dirty word. In such frustrating and anxious times, proposals proliferate to seriously amend or scrap the Constitution or legislate drastic changes, like expanding the number of Supreme Court justices who would be compliant with the wishes of the party in power. We must avoid such temptations. The problem is not the document our founders created in Philadelphia 237 years ago, but the peculiar situation of our own times, including the volume of deafening voices from social media. On the left, critics of our founding document declare that the checks and balances that it created make lawmaking too arduous and thwart the will of the people. They want to scrap the Electoral College, abolish the 2 senators per state provision, eliminate life tenure for federal judges and Supreme Court justices. Very alarmingly, they want to gut the First Amendment guarantee of free speech. A few days ago, John Kerry, former Secretary of State, U.S. Senator and presidential candidate, warned the World Economic Forum about the dangers posed by social media. Quote, if people only go to one source and the source they go to is sick and has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to be able to just, hammer it out of existence, end quote. He further complained, quote, democracies around the world now are struggling with the absence of a sort of truth arbiter, and there's no one who defines what facts really are, end quote. Good Lord, truth arbiters? Our founders must be spinning in their graves.
Next along our final 7-year timeline, one world government. And here's the verse for one world government in Revelation 13:7. Somebody read that for me?
It was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him for all kindred and tongues and nations. Revelation 13:7.
Walz labels immigrant surge beautiful diversity. Tim Walz, the Democrat vice presidential candidate, bragged of mass immigration, overwhelming small Minnesota town schools with 50 languages. He called it beautiful diversity.
Meanwhile, the opposite is Tim Walz. James and Rita, here is Tim Walz reveling in diversity and inclusion. Have a listen.
We have more refugees per capita than any other state. That's not just morally a good thing. It's our economic and cultural future. This beautiful diversity we see out in Worthington when I'm there, you see 50 languages spoken in the school.
Beautiful diversity. I'm not sure about that, Rita. What do you think?
He was shown up in that debate. That was just a thing of beauty. J.D. Vance absolutely smashed him.
Politico stops hiding desire to see Trump assassinated. Politico warned the public of a very real scenario where Trump loses and where Trump loses and takes power anyway. I don't encourage violence, but that's the headline, and it includes a photo of a burnout map with a red, white, and blue. This is at a United Nations exhibit called an Ecological Living Module. United Nations Environment Program and Yale University's Ecological Living Module, a sustainable tiny house exhibited at UN headquarters in New York. It limits the overuse of natural resources and helps to combat climate change. A few years ago, I'd say about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a movement by the globalists. They were planning to have everyone live in tiny houses, because living in a big house, having a big carbon footprint, harms the environment. So the plan was everybody live in about 200 to 300 square feet. Now they do have tiny houses today. They used to call them park houses. They're 300 square feet or less, on wheels, but the UN wants everybody to live like that. What you're not being told about the Dark Agenda 2030, the true intentions behind the UN's Pact for the Future and Agenda 2030, sustainability and protecting our future, or digital governance. I put an extra S in there, sorry. Digital governance and global control.
Agenda 2030 consists of 17 sustainability goals. So that means that elected and some not so elected politicians came together and agreed that if only every government in the world would adhere to these 2030 aims, some might say instructions, we could eradicate poverty, improve health and education, reduce inequality, tackle climate change, and so on. You might recognize the branding. It is everywhere, although you probably almost never consciously noticed it. It was included in the Euros football. It appeared at the Olympics. It is in every corporate handbook and on every website. Open your new mobile phone and there it is in the apps, even though you didn't ask for it. But of course, who wouldn't want to achieve these noble aims of eradicating poverty and so on? It all sounds so lovely and benign. You would be a very brave leader to stand up at a UN assembly and say, actually, I quite like poverty and inequality, or I don't like poverty and inequality, but I do also have an obligation to make decisions which help people who voted for me in my own country too. And that, above all these lofty global aims, will be foremost in my mind. But as it is also lovely and benign, this Pact for the Future sits alongside two other complementary documents. They are the Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations. So what exactly is this Pact for the Future? Well, according to the United Nations, it covers a wide array of themes, including peace and security, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, aka clamping down on free speech, human rights, gender equality, youth and future generations. It also focuses on transforming global governance to better address these challenges. Global governance, you say? Well, I didn't vote for anyone's prime minister but my own, and I certainly don't want one that is imposed upon me from another country. Have a look at a clip from the UN General Assembly where the Pact for the Future was adopted.
The commitments embodied in the Pact and its annexes reflect the collective will of member states and must guide our actions and encourage us to promote international peace and security, invigorate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, foster just and inclusive societies, and ensure that technologies always serve the common good of humankind. We must move forward together in a spirit of solidarity and multilateral cooperation.
As you can see, world leaders are, on the surface at least, committed to this vision. But it is not possible to achieve these utopian ideals without a deliberate, perhaps forceful, redistribution of food, goods, property, and rights. Just like good old-fashioned communism, the ambition for equal outcome for everyone always results in the very rich getting supremely richer, the very poor perhaps being lifted up a little, but the billions in the middle getting colder, poorer, hungrier, and enslaved within their digital prison.
One world government, tiny homes. Groundbreaking for a new tiny home community for North Texas homeless. Did you ever hear about this yet?
Yeah.
No. Outside the city of Ferris, this is about, I don't know, 20 or 25 miles south of Dallas, will consist of 500 tiny homes and will sit on a 200-acre rural property. It will also include a chapel, medical clinic, cafe, mental health clinic, and counseling areas. Now, this sounds just like the 15-minute cities that are the goal of the World Economic Forum. Now, does it mean that somebody at the head of this tiny home project is actually part of the World Economic Forum agenda? Or could it be just coincidence?
Excuse me, Brother Rick.
Yes.
This right here that you mentioned about, it was a group, Pastor AJ. It was like when I was there, I was at the church when this happened. It was a group that came to the church and talked to Pastor Karen about this. Because what they were trying to do was, they were trying to convince Pastor Karen. They didn't went to Our Calling. They went to so many places, even the Bridge, and actually advertised this thing. And from my understanding, they actually have several people from Dallas that moved in that community.
Wow. Right.
Pastor Karen, at first, she was kind of like, she was really kind of with it, but then she did her own research, and she told the guys, you know what, we appreciate you, but that's okay. We don't want it. We don't play no part in it. She did her research on it.
It's funny that they reach out to get the support of churches.
Yeah.
For this globalist agenda.
What they're trying to do is
our calling is creating our community.
They were trying to get the funds, so they were trying to get more funds to go play a part in it. So, yeah.
Our calling is creating our community.
Listen to that silence. There's no city streets, not the sound of someone getting hurt, screaming down the street.
The faith-based nonprofit breaking ground on something new on nearly 300 acres in Ellis County.
A fully supported tiny home community for those that are experiencing homelessness that need long-term care.
The goal is to build 500 tiny homes here and surround them with all the services some of the most vulnerable in our population need to live out their lives.
Harris-Trump making final campaign pushes. With just over 2 weeks to go before the 2024 presidential election and the race in a dead heat, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are hitting the campaign trail in strategic battleground states.
As both candidates prepare to deliver their closing arguments to voters, today former President Trump sat down with a conservative radio host who asked Trump if on day one he would rather pardon himself or fire special counsel Jack Smith.
It's so easy. I would fire him within 2 seconds.
The Harris campaign responded, referencing what it calls a warning from Trump's longest-serving chief of staff.
They are weighing in courageously in many cases in support of what we need to have, which is a president of the United States who understands the obligation to uphold the Constitution of the United States.
In an interview with the New York Times, retired four-star General John Kelly called Trump a fascist who has praised Hitler and wanted generals like his.
So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
Trump denies Kelly's first-hand accounts. The former president made no mention of Kelly on the campaign trail, but on social media last night called Kelly a lowlife and a bad general, despite expressing confidence in him in the past.
General Kelly will go down in terms of the position of Chief of Staff, one of the great ever.
Trump today rallying in Arizona, Harris in Georgia, and on Friday, the soundtrack of her campaign is scheduled to campaign with her. Sources tell ABC News Beyonce will be at Harris's rally focused on reproductive rights in Houston.
I think it just shows the breadth and depth of the support that we have, and also the enthusiasm that a lot of people are bringing to the campaign and feel about our campaign.
And the closer we get to the actual election day, the more name calling you're going to hear. You're going to hear fascist, unhinged, Hitler, whatever, you know. It's you know, that's not good for society to attack the person instead of the issues. It's just it's inflammatory. It leads to things like civil unrest. Next on our final 7-year timeline, LGBTQ plus agenda. Here's the verse for it. Someone want to read this out loud for us?
The same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Luke 17:29.
Secret Service ripped for plan to send staff to Disney World LGBTQ Summit amid failures protecting Trump. Workplace Summit says it will harness, grow the light of LGBTQ community. Trump protected by queer joy and resilience. Secret Service staff scheduled for a taxpayer-funded 4-day summit on the LGBTQ plus agenda at Disney World. Former President Donald Trump has narrowly escaped being murdered by at least 2 would-be assassins. Now, I heard just before I left the house that because of the hurricane, they've canceled this LGBTQ 4-day summit. But still, that they would implement a thing like that is kind of remarkable, I think.
Of all the times of the year to do it, did somebody schedule this not realizing there was an election? And that election is the Secret Service's busy season, you know?
Well, can you not imagine? I mean, the optics of this are terrible. The Secret Service, after having failed dramatically, and then having, I guess they're so scrapped that they don't have enough agents, they're going to be sending folks down to Disney for a celebration of all these things. Let me read what this is for people who don't understand. This is the largest LGBTQ IA plus summit in the world, okay? And it's going to be at Disney World, and Disney is a very proud sponsor of this, of course. It says 2024 Out and Equal Workplace Summit Illuminate, October 7th through 10th at Orlando, Florida. Here's what it says. This is out of outandequal.org, the site that is well owned by this group. It says, Lou, you're going to love these platitudes. Get ready. All right, folks, here we go. We are in a moment when the voices and actions of a few are attempting to dim the light and progress of an entire movement. Now, remember, Disney is hosting this. Disney wanted to host this. And while it may seem overwhelming, we must remember our potential, our strength, and our value. In times of adversity, doubt, and challenge, queer joy and resilience will always outshine and persevere.
So go to Disney World for queer joy and resilience. Teachers sue California for hiding kids' trans identities. If teachers have to get signed permission slips to take students on field trips, teachers should also have to notify parents if a child is choosing to go by a different name or wrong sex pronouns. California families are finally fighting back.
All right, listen to this. Last year, 2 California teachers sued their school district in California, saying they had to lie to parents regarding their children's gender status. And now they are suing Governor Gavin Newsom and the Attorney General out there directly over what they're calling a dangerous political agenda. California teacher and plaintiff now, Elizabeth Mirabelli and attorney Paul Jonah, join us right now live. Good morning to both of you. Morning.
Good morning.
All right, so Elizabeth, explain why, because of your school district, you've had to lie to parents.
Well, a policy was rolled out to all teachers, and it required us to, when meeting and speaking with parents, to withhold critical information about their child's mental and emotional health, and specifically refer to that child by one set of names and pronouns in front of parents, and then during the school day, change to another name and another set of pronouns that parents were unaware of.
School board candidate wants boys and girls bathrooms. Zachary Cologne is running for Warwick School Board. Part of his campaign platform that was left out is how he wants to ensure boys can use the girls' room as long as they say they are girls.
Lila hasn't undergone sexual reassignment surgery, and yet the thought of a boy using the girls' locker room made many students uncomfortable. When parents found out, it was brought up at the next school board meeting. One parent read a statement calling Lila a confused teenager who has no place undressing around girls. But when the school refused to take action, nearly 200 students did, staging a walkout in protest of Lila.
I know if I had a daughter there, I would be very upset to have a grown man in the locker room.
Lila had friends on her side as well, who staged their own rally in support of her.
The main message is to educate people on what transsexuality is, and it's to spread more positivity and to bring down the hostility. Spread more positivity and to bring down the
FEMA admits keeping you alive isn't its top priority. While Hurricane Helene brewed over the Atlantic, the nation's preeminent disaster agency was apparently distracted by concerns of equity and climate resilience over emergency preparedness.
It might be a good idea to see what these words used to mean and what they mean now. Diversity used to mean that people of different backgrounds were free to join a group or association. Equity used to mean enforcing equal standards for all individuals and groups. Inclusion used to mean allowing people of every background and identity to participate in a group or association. Now, in their DEI context, these words all mean one thing: applying unequal standards to ensure preferential outcomes for individuals and groups based on race, sex, and gender identity. The DEI movement is not about a sincere desire to make educational or corporate institutions more diverse, more equitable, or more inclusive. If you don't believe me, try having an open discussion on your company message board or at your next DEI seminar about why the same standards should apply to everyone, everywhere, regardless of race, sex, or gender identity. Try that and you know what will happen. You'll be shouted down, shunned, reprimanded, and maybe fired.
Hospitals transitioned 6,000 kids from 2019 through 2023. Patients are being harmed by sex transition. That cannot be disputed. The medical profession has lost its way. At least 5,747 gender disfiguring surgeries, in other words, mutilation, on minors between 2019 and 2023, according to a database released by Do No Harm Advocacy Group.
Will be. You have to remember this is such a new phenomenon, right? Relatively new in the medical, in the medical world. So, who's to even say where some of these children will be in 10, 20, 30 years from now that we've rushed through this medical pipeline?
And it's my understanding, Beth, that among adults who consider themselves transgender, which, look, I am of the opinion that nobody's a mistake. Your body's not a mistake. You're not going to find fulfillment in turning yourself over to the pharmaceutical industry or hacking yourself up. Satisfaction does not lie that way. But among adults who say that they are transgender, my impression is that they're opposed to kids being hacked up, aren't they?
I would say that's by and large accurate. I would say that generally speaking, just your average American adult, whether they're willing to say it or not publicly, they know that this is wrong. This does not sit well with people. That's why there's such an effort to actually deny and hide that they're doing it. We wouldn't really need to have this database published if the medical facilities were honest about what they're doing, but they're not, and that's because it's not popular. It's not. It's your common sense adult understands that we don't just chop off a healthy girl's breast because they went through a brief phase of saying that they want to be a boy. So certainly many adults who even identify as transgender would agree with that same sentiment.
The thing that I've heard a lot is that even people in that cohort are saying, no, wait until you're an adult so you can make these decisions for yourself. But that's not the way these kids are being treated. And it seems to me that the other piece is that part of this is that parents are being cowed into this, that they're being fed all sorts of lies about what the future looks like for their kid unless they turn that child over to this industry.
Yes, parents unfortunately are experience a lot of pressure. They're fed a very common lie. I'm sure you've heard this line before. Would you rather have a dead son or a living daughter? Essentially making parents feel that they're in an impossible situation, that many parents don't feel that it's right, don't necessarily want to medicalize their child, but then they're told by doctors and medical professionals, people that they trust, that if you don't do it, then you will be responsible for your child committing suicide. Now, we know that the research does not support this absolutely heinous claim. We know that suicidal ideation increases after a child is medicalized. And I think that, I think in general, the tide is beginning to turn on this issue. I think people are having a little bit more awareness. We hope that our database plays a major part in that awareness. So hopefully parents will start to wake up to this lie and take a different approach if their child comes to them with these same sorts of problems.
Yeah.
In California, marriage could mean anything. Proposition 3 seeks to change marriage further by enshrining it into the state constitution. The phrase, "the right to marry is a fundamental right," and striking the phrase, which is the way it reads now, striking the phrase, "only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California."
In capital speak, Prop 3 is what they call a cleanup law. Court rulings have made same-sex marriage legal in California and nationwide. Even so, California still has a law in the books banning same-sex marriage. If you open our state constitution, you'll find these words in Article 1. Only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California. This was the controversial Prop 8, approved by California voters back in 2008. Because the courts already struck it down, it's unenforceable. If voters pass Prop 3 this year, the language will be repealed and replaced with "the right to marry is a fundamental right." No mention of gender at all. Attitudes towards queer people have changed a lot in 16 years. Prop 3 is going to give California our first direct test of how much. A yes vote on Prop 3 would repeal California's obsolete ban on same-sex marriages. And a no vote would keep the ban in the state constitution, but that ban would remain unenforceable.
Next along our final 7-year timeline, one world religion. There's a verse for that in Revelation 13. Who'd like to read this for us?
And he empowered to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Revelation 13:15.
Megachurch Scandals. Ruth Graham, not the Billy Graham wife person. This is an author in the New York Times. called out several prominent Dallas-Fort Worth pastors and churches for eyebrow-raising misconduct. T.D. Jakes, Robert Morris, and Tony Evans. Dallas megachurches hit with spiritual warfare.
Sadly, our top stories right now involve megachurch scandals. A woman claims megachurch pastor Robert Morris sexually assaulted her for years. Cindy Clemashier claims megachurch pastor Robert Morris began sexually abusing her when she was just 12 years old. The Wartburg Watch first reported the alleged abuse, where Clemashier says she was only 12 when the abuse began. She claims that it lasted for 4.5 years afterwards. It started on Christmas Day 1982 and continued until March of 1987. Clemashier says Morris told her, "Never tell anyone about this because it will ruin everything." When her father found out, he demanded that Morris get out of ministry or he would call the sheriff. Morris reportedly stepped down from ministry for 2 years. This article focuses on Clemashier's story and the abuse that she survived from. With pastors such as T.D. Jakes, Tony Evans, and now Robert Morris, it has us wondering what is going on in Dallas in the spiritual warfare arena. Are principalities and powers behind the timing of some of the controversies coming out of Dallas megachurches? From accusations of T.D. Jakes being part of sex parties with music giant Sean Diddy Combs, to Tony Evans stepping down from Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship due to sin, and now Robert Morris of Gateway Church confessing inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady, the number of leaders falling continues to grow. If we look at the state of Texas, it's a place of major influence for our entire nation. It is also the border to our nation where there's a real crisis related to immigration. Do these cases speak directly to how careful we are supposed to be with what we allow into our lives?
Christians from 54 nations brave war dangers to bless Israel. Christians still came to Israel to participate in the special celebration. They toured southern Israeli communities ravaged during the October 7th attack. On the fifth night of the feast, this is the Feast of Tabernacles, President Isaac Herzog welcomed them at Jerusalem's Tower of David Museum.
Battling a fear of war and travel difficulty given airline cancellations, Christians still came to Israel to participate in this special celebration. They toured southern Israeli communities ravaged during the October 7th attack, heard from an IDF soldier, and on the fifth night of the feast, President Isaac Herzog welcomed them at the Tower of David Museum in Jerusalem.
In this time of so much grief, your gathering here says clearly and loudly, there is an answer to hatred. There is an answer to brutality. There is an answer to evil. Like so many Christian communities throughout the world, you've stood with the people of Israel in our hour of darkness.
Despite the war, more than 500 Christians from some 50 nations have come to Israel to stand with the Jewish people and say, you're not alone.
It's the largest solidarity mission to Israel since the war began on October 7th last year, and it's a Christian solidarity mission.
David Parsons of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, tells CBN News the Christian message is clear.
We want to tell the people of Israel that all these charges of genocide against them, all the accusations and people trying to shame them or anyone who supports them, and we're going to stand here beside them, knowing they are fighting a just war in a moral way.
The ICEJ has held these annual celebrations since 1980, with thousands attending each year. Parsons, though, sees this year's gathering as unique.
This is a Gideon's army. When the Lord told Gideon, send the people home, he said, if they're afraid, go home. So we have a high caliber of people of faith who have come here to make this statement of support for Israel.
And that's all I have for you tonight.